Welcome to Proles of the Round Table.
Hello and welcome to Proles of the Round Table, your bi-weekly dose of history without the liberalism. I'm your host, Jeremy, but we're going to wait a bit before we introduce the rest of the crew. Firstly, I'm sure a lot of you are wondering exactly what the fuck is going on. Many of you have reached out to me over the past 4 years to ask when we were coming back, and I answered sincerely every time that I thought it would never happen, that the rift was too deep and that the damage was too great. But a lot has changed in the past few months, and I am happy to announce that ProlesPod is back. This episode is more or less going to be a history of PRT from its roots until its dissolution. I'm going to follow that up with a discussion of how things are going to be different this go around, what we learned during the first iteration of Proles, and so on. Then we'll hear from the other co-hosts, only 2 for now, but we'll get into that later. And then finally, we're going to hear from you, our beloved listeners. Those of you who were subscribed to our Patreon before have likely heard a lot of this, as we covered some of it in various bonus episodes, and those who listened to the first anniversary episode have gotten part of it as well. But at Proles, we love living in the past, so here we go again. In March of 2014, I was a member of the Socialist Party USA, aka SPUSA. It's a big tent organization, which was deeply frustrating to work with, but that's a story for another time. I had gotten just enough communists of various types together from around Colorado to form a local chapter. And once every 6 months, we would get together in person in Denver, where most of them were from, to talk about our plans for the next 6 months. But it was always the same 4 to 5 people. We weren't making any kind of headway on recruiting. We couldn't really move forward with most of our plans because we never had more than this tiny number to work with. But in the early summer of 2016, one of those proud members of the Vanguard, Drew, suggested we have a barbecue in his backyard and invite both lefties and libs. Basically anyone who was interested in comradely fellowship, but also anyone who wanted to ask questions of us. And we had about 15 people show up, which was a rousing success compared to our previous attempts. I then had the bright idea to have a rolling monthly meetup of a similar type, but not wanting to burden Drew, I figured we could meet at one of Denver's 5,000 different breweries, allowing people from around the city to get there easily. And the meetings grew larger and larger. We got some feedback that not everyone wants to drink, not everyone likes beer, and of course, some people are in active recovery and would prefer not to be around alcohol. So we started alternating between breweries and coffee shops. We peaked at 65 attendees, and since we had about a dozen people at that point who were traveling to Denver every month from Colorado Springs, we chose to let the Denver folks keep running those meetings while I would start holding similar meetups in the Springs. This would have been right around October of 2016, just before the election of Donald Trump. At one of our brewery meetups in Colorado Springs, a group of students from the local university's socialist reading group showed up, and we discussed incorporating both groups kind of into one organization. I had become increasingly annoyed by the open hostility toward tankies among the SPUSA leadership. The chair was an anarchist, probably still is. He had been for years. Even though I was not at that point a Marxist-Leninist, it was just frustrating to me to see that one particular group was constantly targeted and pushed out. And so necessarily SPUSA would have a very particular character because this would happen over and over and over. Anyway, Because I was annoyed with SPUSA, I chose not to incorporate this organization within that group, and we kind of just started our own independent group, no connection to existing parties or orgs. Thus was born another frustrating big tent organization, Colorado Springs Socialists, also known as CSS, with whom most of the Proles worked until the end of 2018, when an attempt was made to merge CSS with the ill-fated Marxist Center, another frustrating big tent group. Regardless, in March of 2017, when Trump was threatening an invasion of Syria, CSS organized a march against imperialism, at which we got harassed by some Nazis, and at which, we discovered later, 2 undercover cops which had infiltrated the group were posted up. We eventually got kettled by CSPD, and although most of us were able to break free and book it to our cars, 6 participants in the protest were arrested and charged with various misdemeanors and felonies, including inciting a riot. And again, this was a peaceful protest. The most radical thing we did was march in the street. That was the extent of our riot. If you want to read more about the arrests and the trial and all of that, which was an absolute sham in which the judge refused to allow the defense attorneys to bring up freedom of speech or freedom of assembly as a defense of the actions of those individuals. You know, again, sort of cementing in my mind that the United States is a place that values neither of those things because neither of them really exist or have any substantial meaning in any way. Anyway, if you want to read more about all of that, you can go to the Wikipedia page, which exists still for Colorado Springs Socialists, and scroll to the section on police infiltration and arrests. But back to our story. My brother, Justin, had started to attend the brewery meetings, and in the summer of 2017, he brought up the fact that one of his favorite things was having slightly inebriated discussions of theory and history, which would happen kind of organically at these things. People would ask questions, and then we would kind of launch into why we believe the things we believe and what aspects of history were important to the discussion. Anyway, I thought it was kind of a fantastic idea to take those recordings, as Justin suggested, and turn them into something that we could post online. But that we should probably make it something like a communist version of Drunk History, since several of us had recently become enmeshed within the immortal science. And since 2 of us had recently been arrested and charged with crimes, we chose to keep our faces and our identities obscured to some degree. So we were aiming for something like Drunk History, but we didn't want to do exactly the same thing, obviously, because we didn't want to be shut down for copyright infringement. But also, we didn't want to have our faces out there. So instead, the first few Proles of the Roundtable episodes were animated YouTube videos. We recorded our audio in the basement of the townhouse that was shared by Justin, 8hop, and Ezra. We would chop the audio down to a quote unquote manageable length, and then Justin and 8hop, mostly Justin, but to some degree 8hop as well, would create all of the animation. This process took about 60 to 80 hours per episode, which meant that there was no way to quickly or easily turn them over. It would be like we would record, I think the first episode was recorded maybe at the end of December of 2017. It might have been the beginning of January. I'm honestly a bit fuzzy on that. But then it would take weeks to then get it ready to be uploaded to YouTube. And by that point, we would already have like 2 or 3 episodes recorded. Ethan suggested that we move to an audio only format, which I was against because I felt like it took away the one thing that made us unique from other leftist content. There wasn't really anything else like that out there, but it was obviously the correct call, as releasing regular episodes on a consistent schedule is one of the most important components that very few people think about when they start projects like this. It is vital to make sure that you are putting out episodes, you know, every week, every other week, once a month, whatever your schedule is, you must put it out regularly, or people get bored or people forget about you or whatever. So it was absolutely the right call, even though, again, I disagreed initially. Anyway, we kept the drinking aspect, kept the general focus on history, but it became a podcast in probably late January of 2018. I believe the first podcast episode was released in February, however. Our first couple of episodes were recorded on a single potato mic in the middle of a literally round table. That's where the name came from. It wasn't very deep. It was just a stupid name that we came up with on the spot because we used a round table. We added 2 more potato mics, which, although it gave us slightly better audio quality and it also made it a little bit easier to edit out individual people's, mouth noises or disfluencies or whatever that they were doing. But it also, because they were all 3 USB mics and all 3 were plugged into one computer with no mixer in between, it meant that they would often have different latency issues, and we had to chop and line those up, which was an absolute nightmare to do. But eventually we started a Patreon to help cover the cost of upgrading our audio equipment, and we ended up building a cheap makeshift podcast studio in the garage with the help of our generous patrons. We were kind of small time for a long time. We had maybe a few hundred listeners max to those early episodes. And then in October of 2018, Justin and I went on Rev Left Radio to defend Stalin. And every month we would say to each other, okay, now we've hit the maximum number of listeners. And then every month we would have more. And it was really wild to experience as a bunch of weirdos from the heart of reactionary political thought in Colorado. And it was incredible, until it wasn't. I am not really going to get into the specifics of the breakup of PRT. Most of you have probably read the statement posted in 2020. Fewer of you read Justin's response that was posted a few months ago. Both of them have been taken down. But I will say that there was some fabrication, and if it wasn't fabricated, then it was misrepresented in basically an attempt to make Justin look worse than he was, because there was a lot of anger back then. And to some degree, it's understandable. But again, I don't want to rehash the drama. We're just going to move on from there. What was really wild was seeing the internet take the stories that were told on the post and then turn it into even more wild stories of how Proles members were embezzling Patreon funds to start a brewery, which is an incredible distortion of an already oblique narrative. But something that everyone should know is that there were real world consequences for Justin when all of that went down. One of the major mistakes we made during the first run of PRT is that we put an undue amount of work on the shoulders of 2 people, Justin and Ethan. Ethan managed the website. He edited all of the RPG episodes and many of the bonus episodes, as well as some of the regular episodes. He managed the Twitter with Justin. I ran the Facebook account. Justin ran the Instagram account and did almost everything else. He was in charge of editing 90%, I would say, maybe more than 90% of the regular episodes, and the remaining bonus episodes that Ethan didn't do. He contacted most of our guests, and he took care of, most importantly, he took care of the Patreon and the bank account. Patreon requires that one single person take on the income for tax purposes. Justin had anticipated using Patreon money to pay the tax bill for the Patreon money, but when Proles was dissolved, he got stuck with the bill and had no more income. And that bill was $9,000. Whatever your opinion of Justin's behavior from that time, the way it was handled resulted in food literally being taken from his family's mouth, and neither he nor they deserved it. This could have been handled very differently, but that's the past, and we're moving forward. And there is good news, obviously. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. This was an opportunity for self-reflection and self-improvement, particularly on Justin's part. which he's going to get into the specifics of that shortly. Yes, Justin is back. And although there was initially a lot of anger toward him following the release of his statement about 4 or 5 months ago, among the rest of the former Proles, in a discussion that happened later that month, it came up that there was some regret in the way things were handled back in 2020. And that kind of gave me pause and made me reconsider whether people really were still upset or might still hold grudges that would prevent Proles from restarting. But before I kind of went down that path of restarting Proles of the Round Table, I felt it was important to sit down with each of the former Proles face to face and discuss the relaunch. And regardless of kind of what happened in 2020, they were owed that as part of the podcast and part of developing it to be what it became. And lo and behold, no one holds a grudge. To one degree or another, everyone has given their blessing. At least one would like to be actively involved, at least in a sort of minimal role. But the rest of the gang have at least said, yeah, go for it. I'm happy to see this happen. Even if a couple have some reservations in terms of how we could prevent conflict from arising again. Taylor and Justin have already reconciled, and Taylor will be joining us on some upcoming episodes, kind of as, background peanut gallery kind of commentary. Alex and Ezra have both stated a willingness to reconcile with Justin, although they are choosing not to participate in Proles at this point. In terms of additional lessons that we learned, we had too many hosts on the original run. We had 8 regular members and then a handful of folks who were also involved kind of peripherally. Additionally, we were all from the same town in Colorado, all Americans. Further, aside from Alex and Ezra, we were all white. Aside from Alex, Ezra, and Savannah, we were all white dudes, which meant that there was not a huge diversity in experience. I know that a lot of you are going, identity politics, but that's not even really the point. This is a matter of making sure that we're not funneling ourselves into a very particular way of looking at the world. If we have people from a variety of backgrounds, then we're going to have a variety of perspectives, which is going to be valuable if we're analyzing a particular subject. So basically, in summation on that, for the new run, we're going to try to keep it to 4 to 5 regular hosts, even if we have others who kind of drift in and out. Justin and I will be the only white dudes from Colorado among those hosts. So that'll be, again, kind of, it is going to change things to some degree because we're not all going to be able to meet physically in the same room other than Justin and I. But I think for other reasons, this is a good move. We were also allergic to paying ourselves for our labor back during the first run. Even when the Patreon really started rolling and we were pulling in a couple $1,000s a month, we tried to keep all the money set aside for upgrading our equipment, for mutual aid, and for stupid stuff like ProlesCon. And that's fine. I think we should, for the most part, be setting aside money for helping people more so than we should be setting aside money to help ourselves. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be compensated for the labor that we're putting into this. We only started buying food and drinks for ourselves about 6 months before Proles dissolved. And then we also only started paying ourselves monetarily at the very end. Literally, we decided to start paying ourselves on the last episode that was released. And that was $50 for appearing on the episode and $100 for editing the episode, which is generally a 4 to 8 hour job. So it's not even really a huge like compensation for doing all of that work. We also only started equitably dividing responsibility at the very end. By that point, it was too little too late. Sort of the damage had been done. And speaking of drinks, that's probably, I know this is maybe going to make some of y'all sad, it's probably out the window as well. Although it helps with making us more ridiculous and therefore maybe more apt to make jokes, it's also a contributing factor in us making mistakes during the episodes. It was also a contributing factor to a number of the huge blow-up arguments which preceded the breakup in 2020. I would say that at least a few of us at the time were functioning alcoholics, and that's not great either. We may, at some point in the future, for old time's sake, do a classic drinking episode, but it will no longer be a part of the general format. And part of that is for our own health. Part of that is, again, these things that I mentioned. I think this will probably make us a little bit more accessible to people who are in active recovery. They're not going to be sort of subjected to this constant barrage of like, oh, everybody's popping their drinks and drinking and getting stupid on air, if that makes sense. Another issue is that we became too involved with our listeners. Between the various social media platforms and our Discord, we put a lot of time and effort into maintaining social and parasocial relationships with dozens, if not hundreds of folks. And while it was oftentimes rewarding and encouraging, it feels good when you have people telling you how much they love your stuff and what a good job you're doing and all of that. But there were other times that it was extremely draining. So while we're never going to be fully disconnected from you, the listener, we are going to try to maintain healthier boundaries, and there will be no Discord. I'm sorry. I know this will probably be disappointing to some of you. But yes, Proles will be returning to its bi-weekly schedule effective immediately. We won't be relaunching the Patreon until we get a few episodes out there for y'all. Social media is also going to be limited initially, but piece by piece, we're going to be building back to where we were, or at least that's going to be our goal. And with that, let's hear from my co-hosts. Justin, do you want to start?
Hi, I'm Justin. I guess first off, I want to say that I'm super pumped to be back behind the mic talking history and revolution. For the past 4 years, rarely a day went by that I didn't think about all the missed opportunities, regret, the hole we left, and the people we let down when it all ended in a flash. But in a lot of ways, I think maybe even we needed that. My whole life, I've dealt with ADHD and depression, which obviously didn't come up till the teen years. And between my parents not wanting to put me on meds and a societal stigma around talking about it and treating it, as well as the toxic masculinity that creeps into every guy that lives in this dystopian hellscape in some way or another, I never got it treated. And in the ultimate contradiction, I spent my whole life self-medicating from 16 to a couple years ago. And a gamut of drugs and alcohol, believe it or not, aren't a replacement for proper treatment. It caused many, many more problems than it ever solved, and it cost me a number of important relationships, not to mention opportunities that I could have / should have been able to take, but couldn't because of the ramifications of living life that way. But after the Proles dissolution, both kinds, with no friends, no way to organize politically, and no podcast editing, recording, and maintenance to take up all my time, I was left with a lot to reflect on, and this led me down a lot of paths. I'm a little brother, so I've spent my life in cornered raccoon mode. When I feel like I'm being wronged, I've always tended to overreact. The depression and the frustration that comes with untreated ADHD snowballed this into something that could, at times, manifest in toxic ways. Without getting into details, this is what I did in reaction to what was done to me, and it took a situation that was really fucked up but might have been fixable to something that was more like a scene out of a Wile E. Coyote and Roadrunner cartoon. For my part in that, I fucked up, and I'm sorry. In reaction to my overreaction, even worse things were done to me, and it cut deep. I spent almost 2 years steeped in a mixture of hatred and self-loathing. It wore me out, but the impact on my family gave me the strength I needed to get it taken care of. As many of you might remember, I first tried to get on antidepressants while Proles was still going, but in order for them to work, you can't drink. And not only was I on the lowest dose available, I only quit drinking for a few weeks, so it never actually worked. Turns out that when you're on the correct dose, you don't actually want to drink. So I spent months back and forth with my doctor until I finally felt, for lack of a better word, normal. It's hard to describe this feeling for people who haven't felt it, but I'd say it's like when you feel like everything is crashing down on you, but then someone gives you an amazing hug and the worst of it melts away. It's like that, except 24/7. I could never put into words how important this was for me, but it's probably the single most transformative thing that has happened to me, except maybe having my first child. After this, I figured, what the hell, and talked to my doctor about the ADHD. This process took me almost a year of appointments and med changes, but damn. If antidepressants are like a hug whenever you need it, the proper ADD meds are like, after living your life in perpetual twilight, finally turning the lights on. And, shocker of all shockers, turns out that when you aren't living every day in constant frustration from your inability to remember or focus on the things that are important to you, it helps with the depression too. Moral of the story, I've grown and changed in incredible ways, can reflect and understand the mistakes I made and the impact they had. And if you're listening to this on the fence about getting treated, for the love of Saint Steel, please make it happen. After all that and being able to fully make peace with Taylor, whom I'd placed a lot of blame on for what happened, I'm in a better place to do this project than I ever was at even the best of times during the first run. Turns out that there was, unsurprisingly for two men in the belly of the beast, a real lack of understanding and communication between Taylor and I that was to blame for almost the entire thing. But we're back, baby, and I'm pumped for the future of Proles. We got an incredible list of topics either already recorded or on the schedule. We've got a plan for how to keep it going long-term with minimal burnout, and we've got plans to make it even more impactful if we can get enough subscribers to free up some of our time. One of the biggest contributors to the determination that I needed to motivate me to get over the hurdle of wanting to restart Proles to actually doing it came in the form of a podcast I stumbled onto called Actually Existing Socialism, which had the sort of topics and guests that were so unique that I learned more in the 2 weeks that I binged all of the episodes than I have since I first started learning the immortal science. And I am so incredibly grateful and excited to introduce the architect of AES podcast and the newest permanent member of Proles of the Round Table, Tony.
Woo! Wah, wah.
Thanks for that generous introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Tony, and I am the new Prole. Before we get to who I am, I just want everyone to know that I'm currently on week 6 of the new Prole re-education program. This last week, I spent 24 hours in a dimly lit room with Trotsky's writings on Stalin, layering over a speaker system.
Surprise, you're a Prole. And I mean, this isn't anything that all of us haven't done.
Right. Yes. All of us did this.
Everyone has to go through it. It's a requirement. So Trotsky's writings on Stalin were laying over a speaker system, and in the room with me was a laptop with Adobe InDesign and a printer. When I finally finished the 24 hours, I had to be in that room and left. Justin was out there waiting for me, and he informed me that I'd passed. When I asked how I passed, since I didn't really do anything, he told me that I'd passed because I didn't come out with a glossy, well put together, freshly published newspaper to hand out. But all jokes aside, I'm very grateful to be here. I guess what needs to be known about me, I'm a Black Canadian. My family immigrated here when I was young, and I'm still based in Canada today. I grew up fairly standard liberal with a huge helping of evangelical Christianity. And yes, certainly working through that as well still. I don't think anything I learned about socialism growing up was positive outside of it's a good idea, but it just never works. Yeah, it's a good idea on paper, but it just never works out. Exactly.
Yeah.
I'm sure like many listeners, my political awakening happened in the lead up to the 2016 U.S. election. Certain realities were laid bare, contradictions were sharpening, and the standard bearer for liberalism, in this case the Democratic Party, had barely a coherent response. I'd previously been self-critical of the state of things because, as a Black person in the settler state, I would be foolish not to. But I hadn't yet made the connection that this was a system problem, not a people problem. We didn't just need the right people in the right places. It wasn't a voting problem either. The problem was capitalism.
You don't want to be the change that you want to see in the world?
You don't want a Pokemon go to the polls?
Oh, no, come on. I have that tattooed on my chest. So around this time, 2015, 2016, 2017, new alternative media was popping up and are becoming more prominent. For example, Rev Left Radio, Proles the Roundtable, may have heard of it, and several other shows like the Michael Book Show on YouTube. And also at this time, things like Parenti's quotes from Michael Parenti were going viral. So all of these were a huge influence, make me realize that socialist construction has occurred and been successful, and that it should be supported critically, studied and understood with a historical materialist lens, and to not be blindly demonized, playing into the capitalist realist presentation of reality where there is no alternative. There's only capitalism. And thus, I'd made the transition from liberal to social democrat to socialist. Despite previously being led to believe, whether through reading Animal Farm in the 7th grade or writing my 11th grade English paper on religious persecution in communist countries, that socialism can't work, when in fact, it has, and it is working. If I can find that paper from over a decade ago, I feel like it's something that we should read on the show.
That would be great. Yeah, a bonus episode maybe?
Hell yeah.
Yeah, a bonus episode for sure. I'm a Marxist. Through my support of actually existing socialist countries, I think that naturally makes me a Marxist-Leninist. Something that I don't think I've necessarily stated outright on my own show, actually existing socialism. But I guess this is my coming out. So you're probably wondering at this point, why the hell did Justin approach me to join the relaunch of Proles a few months back? Well, you're not alone in that, because I'm still asking myself that question. So I'm an avid reader, and going back to 2017 and onward through the pandemic, I would consume anything I could about socialist countries. But I quickly noticed something that I'm sure all of you have at some point. If you try to find a good source about a socialist country that wasn't liberal or just straight up anti-communist, it had to be some terribly scanned PDF or something from not necessarily the best sources, or documents from the socialist period itself, like, for example, a 1970s Novosti Press pamphlet. You know what I'm talking about here. And of course, especially when it came to countries like that were part of the Baltics or even African socialist experiments, there's essentially nothing or very little in English that wasn't blatantly anti-communist. If they did have anything in English, they'd often be from anti-communist emigres or anti-communist foundations like the Victims of Communism. And as I've said before, on my show, I really try not to dump all this info on my wife or family members or friends. A podcast, I guess, seemed to be the appropriate outlet to contribute to the cause, the socialist cause, in a way that was internationalist and not circumscribed necessarily to my dismal local conditions.
Yep.
Preaching to the choir here.
I started releasing episodes of my podcast, Actually Existing Socialism, in May 2022. It's a podcast dedicated to exploring past, present, and future manifestations of real-world socialism by speaking to those who've studied, lived in, or currently live in a socialist country. The show is evergreen, so episodes aren't really tied to necessarily what's going on in the news necessarily. So they're always fresh, and you can really start from the first episode if you want, or just find a topic or a country that suits your interest. Some familiar names I've had on the show include the amazing Gerald Horn, the wonderful Cal Walsh, and the always informative Henry Huckamaki of Guerrilla History Podcast. As of this recording, I have 28 episodes out and have covered countries such as North Korea, Latvia, Socialist Ghana, the Soviet Union, of course, Laos, East Germany, the Czechoslovak Social Republic, and many others, and more to come. So late last year, in 2023, Justin made a tweet from the ProlesPod Twitter account, which first shocked me. I was like, wait, what? Proles is still a thing? So this tweet was a reposting, I think, of an episode that I'd recently put out there. And Justin wrote through the ProlesPod account, "This podcast is an absolute banger. It's a bit like if Proles did episodes in our grandparents' living room." So when I first read that, I was like, wait, is this an insult or a compliment? I'm still not sure exactly what you meant by that, Justin, but you did finish it off nicely by saying, go support this man and his incredibly important project. This is, of course, something very meaningful to me, as I've mentioned, Proles' influence prior. And also really any encouragement that you can give to people who create content goes a long way in inspiring them to keep going.
Yeah. I mean, I mentioned earlier when I was talking that you need to have boundaries between yourself and your listeners because it does get exhausting trying to maintain those parasocial relationships. But it also does feel good when a listener is like, hey, good job. This is fantastic. I learned so much. Or like, I used to be a liberal and I became a Marxist Leninist because I listened to your shit. Like that feels good, So
yeah, it gives that energy when there's none left to give.
Right. Yeah.
So a few weeks after this tweet, Justin reached out to me, letting me know that Proles was coming back and that he was interested in me joining as one of the new hosts. Due to reasons he had mentioned earlier, he'd found my podcast, Actually Existing Socialism, to be meaningful and informative. So I had a meeting with him and Jeremy, which we talked about what the project would look like. And of course, I had to think it over, mostly due to some previous misconceptions about the initial dissolution of Proles. But, they really convinced me on the importance of bringing this project back. So I'll be on the project for the foreseeable future. Not sure I've told you guys this, but what was the clincher for me saying yes is when talking about differences between what Proles is trying to do and my show. So my show is mostly an interview format. It's me interviewing a specific expert on a specific socialist country, not necessarily me putting forth my own ideas, even though, of course, I do occasionally try to do that. But Justin suggested that it'd be cathartic for me to be more open on Proles, to speak my mind on certain things. So my presence on the show will be me being more open and adding a fresh, hopefully, perspective.
Yeah.
So I look forward to the future with you guys. Thanks so much for having me. Listeners, thanks so much for listening. And I look forward to hearing from you guys.
Hell yeah. Thank you for accepting.
Yeah. I'm glad you're here. So I guess in terms of what's coming up in the future, as Justin mentioned, we have some episodes on deck. We've already recorded these. They will be released out of order, though. This will obviously be the first episode. It's the first one you're hearing. We've got an episode on political subversion in the German Democratic Republic, mostly on the part of the CIA. And then we're going to be having some Scottish comrades come on to talk about kind of generally the labor movement in the early 20th century in Scotland, but also a very little known historical event outside of Scotland, which is the time that Winston Churchill rolled literal tanks on Glasgow, or Glasgow, as they say. And following that, we have the very heavy, dark, and serious episodes on Ukraine, which will probably be less funny than the rest of these will hopefully be. Yeah.
But informative and rage-inducing.
Right. And that's the other side of Proles. Laughs, inducing rage. It's the dichotomy of Proles. So any final thoughts before we bring it home?
I'm just fucking excited. I'm excited to do this again. I'm excited to learn and to share that learning, and excited to be a part of the project again and to really kind of refocus my energies.
Same here. I'm glad to be back. It's been difficult. Like, we did a lot of in-person active political organizing before we started Proles, but when Proles fell apart, it kind of felt like I felt deflated and I didn't have a lot of energy to do anything. So it feels good to kind of be back doing this again and having an outlet for this kind of stuff. I think too, a lot of political discourse amongst Marxist-Leninists has been in a very particular direction lately. The sort of the incorporation of nationalism amongst colonizer states, I think, is a dangerous thing, and I am concerned about the direction that that's taking. So I think it'll be good for us to, hopefully, be back to counter that. But yeah, I guess that about does it for this episode. I do want to say thank you to all of the people who contributed to Proles of the Roundtable in its first iteration, for all of the people who have signed on to assist us in the future, to all of the listeners who kept bugging us over the past 4 years, asking when it's going to come back. Knowing that people missed us and wanted this to return is one of the main reasons we're doing it. And once I'm done doing this outro, we're going to have a bunch of different clips where people get to say their piece about Proles of the Round Table, why it was important to them, things that they missed, stuff like that. But in general, you can find us at ProlesPod on both Twitter and Instagram. Again, we may expand out into other social media platforms as time goes on, but that's where we're at right now. No Patreon at the moment, but again, at some point in the future, we'll get that going. If you have any questions, comments, or episode ideas, please give us an email at ProlesPod@outlook.com. Please follow, review, and like all of our stuff everywhere it goes. It helps us out in terms of the algorithm. And we will see you in 2 weeks. May the specter haunt your streets, and solidarity forever.
Forever. I became a ML long after the first iteration of Proles had broken out, and while y'all weren't the reason for my conversion, that crown goes to Marxist Paul, Hakeem, and Ugopnik. Listening to the old episodes of Proles really helped me deepen my understanding of communism, and I am beyond excited to listen to you all again.
Good day, my name's Jay. I'm originally from Aotearoa, New Zealand, but I've called Australia home for the last 10 years. I was fortunate enough to stumble upon Proles of the Round Table around 2019-2020 during long work hours as a chef. Podcasts were my lifeline during those shifts. Kind of felt like finding a hidden treasure. The Proles, they don't just spout opinions like a broken faucet. They actually serve up researched, thought-provoking content. Imagine a buffet of history, politics, and theory all laid out with precision. You know, they'll say instead, hey, here's our perspective, but don't take our word for it. Dive into the archives, read up, engage. Socialism through a Marxist-Leninist lens is organic, living, changing to the times. It learns from itself, admits its wrongs, takes what was right, and moves on, adapting to a changing environment. The Proles' voices weren't just in my earbuds, they were companions during long underpaid shifts. When they discussed socialism, it wasn't indoctrination, it was empowerment. Their opinions were like sturdy bridges, valid, reasoned, sound, leading me across the chasm of ignorance. The show then went on hiatus and I was absolutely gutted. It felt like losing touch with old friends. But the Proles are back now and I'm absolutely stoked. So to the Proles, thank you for keeping me sane, challenging my brain cells. And to all my fellow listeners out there, if you haven't checked out the Proles of the Round Table, do yourself a favor. Dive into the archives, join in, discuss, and let's keep those red flags flying high.
Hey everybody, it's Brett O'Shea from Revolutionary Left Radio. I am here to welcome back the Proles of the Round Table. They were on hiatus for a little bit, but it's very, very cool to see after a couple years that they're re-emerging to continue their political work. From day one, Rev Left and Proles of the Round Table shared a certain energy, a certain sort of spirit, and certainly a certain sort of ideological orientation, and very quickly hit it off. Met several times at various conferences. I went to Colorado on multiple occasions and met up with them, hung out with them, had a blast with them, we had a lot of good fun memories together in the couple times that we had together, and it's really, really cool to see that they're coming back onto the scene, and they're going to continue their wonderful work. I was actually just kind of looking back on some of their old episodes, trying to refresh my memory, and their last episode, I believe, or it was a re-release of an earlier episode, is The End of History, and that was the collaboration that I did with them where we talked about the Marxist understanding of history, and I had a really, really wonderful time with that, and it's really cool that they put that out as their sort of last episode before they went on hiatus and before they're now coming back. very cool, but they have a bunch of episodes on Paul Robespin, on Harry Haywood, Ireland, the question of anti-Semitism under Stalin in Soviet Russia, and a lot of myth busting around that. Cuba, Burkina Faso, John Brown. They have a lot of really good work already in their back catalog, and they're going to come back and kind of put a new spin on their show and continue their work. And I'm very, very excited to have them back, and hopefully we can collaborate as well in the near future and continue to work together, because as I said, I always had a really good time with them, and I really respect the amount of work that they put in to the show. So welcome back, Proles. Really happy to have you back. I'm looking forward to all the great work you're going to be doing in the coming weeks, months, and dare I say, years. Solidarity.
I'm just really excited that ProlesPod is coming back because honestly, it's been a weird couple of years and I haven't done much with them. So I feel like I need to get back into educating myself and back into leftist activism, hopefully, and back into absolutely wetting myself laughing way too many times. Obviously, in terms of a favorite episode, I couldn't really pick one. I really enjoyed the episode on women in Vietnam. I just thought it was something that I'd never learned about before. And there was an episode way back, I think, about indigeneity that was really cool as well. Obviously, though, it's bangers from beginning to end, but as we know, if the first album is bangers from end to end, the second album is invariably better. So really looking forward to it. Can't wait to hear what you have to say other than fucking air horns.
I started listening to ProlesPod shortly before they broke up. Learning about history made me depressed, but it helped turn me from a comfy armchair leftcom to a Stalin-upholding tanky. Then I heard about the split and I was even more depressed, but at least I was pissed and I knew how to get organized.
Hey, Taylor here. Excited to talk about the return of Proles to the Roundtable and also just what Proles means to me. So for years, getting to record this podcast with close friends and comrades and learn and grow together politically to, push to be better revolutionaries, while also spending time outside of the podcast organizing with those same people, and then to build the community that we did and learn from an even greater number of people did amazing things for my understanding of the world, for my understanding of what revolutionary politics can and should be, and how to be a better communist, a better comrade to the people around me, to the world around me. Getting to do the research that I did for the episodes that I was a part of, getting to be there for the episodes that I was just a fly on the wall, adding commentary to, and getting to listen to the episodes that I wasn't ever there for, all the while getting to talk to the people that were making that happen is unparalleled as far as importance to my life as a communist up to this point. And I can't tell you how excited I am that we are back. And I don't know how often I'll be a part of it, but for every time that I am so excited to be there. And for every episode that I am not, I cannot wait to listen. And I hope that everybody is as excited as I am, because 4 years without Proles is a long time to go. And I think it's just, it's really pretty special that we're still here, that we've figured everything out, and that we're ready to go for some more. And I can't tell you how much it means to me, to the comrades that are making this happen again. Man, I'm just here excited for the future, and I can't wait to listen to and be a part of more Proles. Solidarity forever.
As a baby leftist, Proles of the Roundtable was a pretty big introduction for me to Marxist politics. When I was working overtime during the pandemic, it gave me something to listen to, made my days just a little bit better, a little bit more bearable. But it also got me thinking about a lot of the concepts. You know, it got me to start reading Lenin. And even though podcasts aren't the end all be all of organizing, right? I wouldn't have started as early as I did without it. And I really think that means something.
I reached out to Justin a while ago on Twitter just to say how much your show has meant to me over the years, and I know how much it means to so many people. To hear that there's a possibility of you guys sort of starting to come back is incredibly amazing and special, and I can't wait to see what you will do. I think you all managed to capture this sort of lightning in a bottle type magic with what you were doing on Proles. You made communism theory, which can sometimes be quite boring and scary. You made it so accessible, and your show's done so much for sort of moving people sort of along the journey of radicalization and breaking down those barriers of sort of Western education. And I think you've done it in a way that is just so amazing. You've made it so lighthearted and beautiful and personal through history and art and cinema, in a way that really no one else was starting to do. Thank you all so much for everything you've done. I can't wait to hear anything that you guys put out in the future. Solidarity forever. Fuck Trotsky. Love you all.
I think most of us have been brought up on a particular historical narrative that serves to underpin current economic models, namely the capitalist one. And I think my favorite episodes of the Proles are the ones that highlight the achievements of other socialist countries and really challenge that narrative. So the fall of the USSR was a great episode. The one about Thomas Sankara and Burkina Faso was also good. The one on Cuba, I was particularly fascinated with how Cuban democracy functions. So yeah, all of those are just incredibly valuable pieces of media, and really do some great work in challenging narratives.
The educational and entertainment value of ProlesPod cannot be overstated. They taught me that the Soviet Union was good, actually. In fact, Stalin did nothing wrong. Ho Chi Minh did Maoism before it was cool. And LaCroix is a decent drink. I'm really excited to see what the new round of ProlesPod has in store for us, and I wish all of the hosts the best of luck.
Hey y'all, my name is Bo, and just like everybody else listening, I'm sure I'm thrilled that Pros at the Round Table is recording again. I initially discovered ProlesPod because of the episode Justin and Jeremy did on Rev Left, and before that episode, I considered myself what I called a non-denominational Marxist. But after hearing Jeremy and Justin talk about Stalin for 3 hours, I went from feeling like maybe there was validity in every tendency of Marxism to wanting to go home and decorate my house with ice picks. I searched for ProlesPod right after that, and I found it and I was hooked. And this came at a critical time in my life. I had just started my recovery from substance abuse, from drug addiction. And listening to ProlesPod inspired me to do a deeper and more thorough investigation into dialectical materialism. And I was able to apply that philosophy or ideology to my recovery in a way that I feel profoundly helped me and gave me an understanding of the root causes of my addiction. So for that, I'm very grateful. And I guess I just want to say thank y'all. Solidarity forever and free Palestine.